Greetings, cartoon connoisseurs, and welcome to the Animation Conversation, where we explore the art form from pencils to pixels. And now, here are your hosts, Rusty Shackleford and F.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Animation Conversation. I'm Rusty here with F, and today we've got an episode that's going to be writer-centric today. So we were going to discuss some of the woes of being a writer in the animation world and kind of what a writer's place is in animation, because I think they're kind of underrated in the animation world. I feel like a lot of people don't understand that. A writer is half of the story. With the animator does one half of the story, and the other half of the story is the people writing the story. That kind of thing. So,
yeah, it's kind of this. It's kind of this whole. It's this whole weird thing. Like they're especially with the emergence and with the popularity of, primetime style, King of the Hill, Family Guy, Simpsons animation. Those types of shows, your grown-up shows, are very, very writer-centric. Like they couldn't exist without essentially sitcom writers.
oh, absolutely. One of my actual favorite writers comes from The Simpsons. Actually, comes from a dorm room with one of the funniest late night guys, Conan. So Greg Daniels, he's one of my favorite writers due to the fact of his major influence on, of course, my other podcast, King of the Hill. He had a really big influence on the creation of that TV show. So yeah, those adult ones, they're definitely super heavy on writing.
Well, and that's the thing. If you go back to when The Simpsons, like when every episode was just a home run. It's noticeable, and you see the name Conan O'Brien appear a lot on those episodes.
Oh, absolutely.
But now the flip side of that is, when it comes to more cartoony cartoons, your Nickelodeon style, your Cartoon Network style, your Looney Tunes style, writing for cartoons like those is not quite so. It's a whole different animal, and a lot of among animators and among people in the animation industry, there's this. I don't know if other people are even aware of this, and that's why I'm kind of interested to talk about it with you. Like within the animation industry, there's a very, very polarized group of people. There are people who believe that cartoons should only be made by cartoonists, that writers have absolutely no business in it, and they shouldn't be there at all. They're meddling where they don't belong. And then there are others who believe that no, it's the opposite. Without writers, there are no cartoons, and the entire industry would collapse in on itself, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And well, I'll talk about my own feelings eventually, but were you aware of this? Like, as someone who's not in the industry, did you know that there's this clash that is occurring, and that has been occurring for decades now?
I was kind of aware of a clash between maybe not necessarily just in the animation industry, but the industry as a whole. I think sometimes in life we're made aware of it due to the writer strikes and things like that with the writers guilds. We're made aware of the industry sentiment, about writers, how now they're even threatening writers with AI, so it's kind of been evident to me in that way through the media and stuff like that. So I imagine that it was evident in the world of animation as well. If it's evident in the entire industry as a whole, it's all the same beast at the end of the day. It all boils down to the same types of executives that have the same type of mentality about money over creativity and things like that. So for me, I personally, I think that depending on what you're watching, the script is, the story, the how it's written does matter a great deal to the success of the show. You do have the shows like they used to make, like the Looney Tunes and the Tom and Jerry's and stuff, where it was just literally an orchestra making all the sounds, and then you had your Foley artists making the noise, all the other noises and stuff. But you get these shows nowadays, one I just recently watched that's an adult animation one that's really new was called Fired on Mars. And I don't know who any of the
Mm-hmm.
writers are on the show, but it is phenomenally written. But you could tell that it's adult centric in the way that it's
Sure.
written. You could tell that a lot of the really wordy scripts and a lot of the really fleshed out storylines and things like that. You could definitely tell that a lot of that is more geared
Yeah.
towards adults, whereas kids animation. And if you go even younger kids like Dora the Explorer, they have a lot of callbacks where the kids
Mm-hmm.
respond to Dora and stuff like that. And then you have the little older kids where you're getting into like the Dragon Ball Z's and stuff like that, where the
Right.
story again becomes really important. I don't think the
Right.
stories is as important in the Dora Explorer world and stuff like that. Maybe you could go from episode to episode and just do kind of whatever. But when you get into teenage kids watching anime or even stuff like the Gargoyles and stuff like when I was a kid, that was
Mm-hmm.
a very script, very story centric show.
Yeah. Well, and that to me, see, this is where I fall in the whole thing because again, I have as many qualifications as a writer as I do an artist. Now I made my career in animation as a storyboard artist and a director, but I've written my fair share of scripts. I've sold shows where I've written the entire Bibles, and prior to working in animation, I was doing comic strips and comic books. So, for the better part of a half a decade, I wrote a daily comic strip. So to me, that was right. And it was a continuous story. So
Absolutely, yeah.
I consider I consider myself at least as much a writer as I do an artist. And in fact, if you were to push me up against a wall, I would say I'm a much better writer than I am an artist. Now, that being said, again, when I came into the animation industry, I was completely unaware that there was this, sort of, in my opinion, contrived war going on between artists and writers, artists and writers, artists and writers, and in the 25 years that I spent in LA, I'd worked on every kind of show. One that was completely writerless, one that had a single writer who would write outlines, and then ones that were completely and utterly script driven. And I liked working on all three kinds. I think it falls back on the argument that you need the right tool for the right job. You mentioned
Absolutely, yeah.
Dora the Explorer. Dora the Explorer is ostensibly an educational preschooler program. Therefore, it needs to be written because the lessons need to be coherent and cohesive and they need to be appropriate for the age. Dora the Explorer is not about dropping anvils on people.
No, not
You
at
know,
all.
you're,
Definitely not. No.
you're you're there specifically to learn something, so you absolutely need writers for that. Then you've got things like Simpsons and King of the Hill that are 100% geared for an adult audience, and adults having more of a sophisticated and more sort of dialogue driven and situation driven mentality. Of course you're going to need writers for that. But when you've got your gag driven shows, like Ren and Stimpy was entirely a gag driven show,
Yeah, yeah,
you
for
can't
sure.
really write shows like that because it's just one gag after another,
Yeah,
and
it's
you can sit
visual.
down
It goes.
with.
It's visual. It's vaudevillian. You know what I mean? It
Yeah,
goes back to the
that's
the
exactly it.
slapstick, Buster Keaton. It goes back to all that kind of stuff.
Right. And even in those cases, on the occasions where I've worked with people on shows, like I've worked with storyboard artists on shows who are terrified if they don't at least have an outline to follow. Now, again, because I have experience writing, I never have any shortage of ideas, but there are plenty of people in the industry who need something at least as a starting off point. And so if you don't have the idea yourself, you at least need an outline to start with. And you can veer off it as much as you want, but that's exactly it. If you're dealing with a show that's entirely gag driven, you can't write that. Like a writer, can't really sit and go, and then the anvil falls on his head,
Yeah, you can't
pass
write
that
that.
along to an executive and
Yeah.
have the executive think it's funny. You can't read gags on a script
No.
and be sold the joke. They're only sold if they're visual.
So
And I
let me
think
ask you
that's
this
where,
then. So when you're selling a joke to an executive, as somebody who's probably had to do that before, when you're selling that joke, so you can't write a gag, so you have to pre-draw that, right? You have to
Mhm,
pre-draw it, pre-animate, even though it might not get lit up for the show. They might not okay it. You
mhm.
still have to go that route to like show that.
Right. Well,
Okay.
and therein lies the problem is um the real problem is you've got a director, board artists, and writers all trying to sell stuff to an executive and get their stamp of approval on it and saying, yes, I approve of this. And the thing is, 99% of animation executives don't know how to read storyboards. And a lot of them don't even really know how to read scripts because being someone who can read a script and read the visual description of it and then picture that in their mind, that's by the way, I don't blame them for not being able to do that. That's a very like specific group of skills to read a script and be able to visualize it in your head.
Oh,
So what
absolutely.
winds
Yeah.
up happening is, a writer or a board artist will do a thumbnail board of a gag driven show, but because it's not moving and because the executive doesn't know how to read a storyboard and can't visualize it in their head, they look at it and go, I don't get this, this isn't funny.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the board artist is sitting there going, no, trust me, when it's animated it'll be funny. But that's the trouble, is executives don't trust artists. But the thing is, most non-artists are so sort of blown away by the whole drawing aspect of it, and they think to themselves, oh, that's something I could never do, therefore it's alien to me. Whereas writers, everyone knows how to read, so everyone believes
Mostly.
that they can look
Mostly.
at a script and go, oh, okay, I get this. And what winds up happening is a lot of scripts are either incredibly dialogue heavy, where it's really just talking heads. Those are the ones that a lot of executives like because they get it. They don't have to visualize anything, they just have to hear the jokes. But then you've got other ones where then you've got writers who have such carte blanche because, again, all the power is given entirely to the writers because that's what the executives understand. So then you'll have a writer write a script that says, and then a riot breaks out in the middle of town, and every character on the show comes running out. And it's like, then the board artist is stuck having to storyboard 800 characters, and that's, I think, where the sort of hostility comes between writers and artists. It's like the writer is there to fulfill a mandate to please the executive, and the executive just understands sort of the broad strokes of these things, and therefore, you've got these two sides of the equation trying desperately to make someone who doesn't really understand filmmaking understand that what they're going to see is going to be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's definitely interesting to hear. Yeah, that's a dynamic that I guess a lot of people don't really get to hear about, is how writers and their role in animation. I imagine, like I said, I imagine it's it's equally important, if not just as important as a an animator. In that job.
Well, again, it goes back to the right tool for the right job.
Yeah.
If you've got a show that is intended to be entirely gag driven, then no, writers are not as important. But that said, you need storyboard artists who are good at telling stories. And there's a difference between someone who's good at cartooning versus someone who's good at cartooning and good at telling a story. So now, a perfect example of something that, in my opinion, falls somewhere in between that is Rick and Morty. Because when I got hired
Okay.
to do my half of the pilot of Rick and Morty, the executives on that show weren't getting it, even though it was, the parts that I were doing were very dialogue driven and very, sort of sitcom-y. They weren't getting the humor, and the reason they weren't getting the humor was because they weren't seeing the facial expressions, they weren't seeing the pantomime, the body motions, and that sort of thing. So You know, that's one of the things I've always felt was kind of foolish about this rivalry between artists and writers, is that, you know, they need each other.
Yeah, for
And
sure, for sure.
animation is at its DNA, it's a collaborative effort.
Yeah, that was
And
going to be a question that I actually had for you was how does an animation writer collaborate with animators and other visual artists to bring the story to life? Like, how do you directly collaborate? So, do you guys, as the writers writing and you guys are animating, do you guys kind of like, hey, how are you going to write this? Like, what kind of nuances do I need to put in this character's face or in their expressions and their how they
yeah,
move or things like that?
see, and therein lies the problem, is in most of the productions that I've worked on that were, you know, written by writers, there was almost no interaction between the writers and the artists, specifically the writers and the storyboard artists,
Okay,
who, you know, the storyboard artists are to the visuals of the show what the writers are to the plot and the dialogue, you know, so the
absolutely.
two are really pretty equal in that respect. um and so on a show where you need both things to be compatible, it's important that you have both sides, you know, collaborating with one another. Now, on a handful of the shows I've worked on, when I was a supervising director, we made an effort to, you know, make sure that both of those sides were always communicating and always collaborating. And I think one of the reasons that this problem occurs is because the writers are just told, just write something good, right? You know, make this great. And
Absolutely.
so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they'll put down on paper, you know, and then all hell breaks loose and war breaks out and there's a riot in the middle of town because it's big and because it's going to sell and because it sounds exciting. But the thing is, it takes 2 seconds to write a riot breaks out in the center of town, and it takes 3 months to storyboard, you know, even part of that. So, but again, every episode of every show, you get the same amount of time, no matter how complicated the script is. So you've got writers who aren't communicating with the board artists, and then in the middle of it all should be the director. The director, to me, the big thing that would fix a lot of these problems is if the director had sort of script approval, because the series director, should have an overall view of the entire series run. And they should be able to look at a script and go, we can't have a riot in the center of town on this episode because we just got done with a riot in the center of town on the episode prior to that. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
it's gonna run everybody ragged. We can't do it. Come up with something else. But right now, that kind of collaboration doesn't occur. It's
Hmm.
as far as I can see.
Yeah, it's become disconnected or whatever you're in
Yeah,
that way. Yeah. Okay. So,
writers hang out with writers, artists hang out with artists. The two don't talk enough. And again, the director should be the one sort of interpreting for both. But I feel as though that doesn't happen nearly enough in the industry.
yeah. Well, for you, for someone who's been in the industry as long as you have, uh, what are some of the what are some of your favorite writers in the animation world, specifically animation world? Because I could say writer in a grand scheme of media, you know, whether it be TVs, movie, whatever,
Mm,
but just specifically in animation, and it could be film as well, animated film. But
yeah,
who are some of your favorite writers, and so who are some specifically that might have influenced you? Because you are also a writer too. So are there like
sure.
who might have influenced you in some of your writing in the animation world specifically?
Well, see, and that's another thing that sort of, and I'll answer your question, but there aren't, one of the other problems, in my opinion, and I do believe that this is finally rectifying itself. When I got into the industry, there weren't that many cartoon writers. You know, there are very few people who are inspired by cartoons and go, I'm going to be a cartoon writer, and
Yeah,
then
for
they
sure.
study every aspect of animation with the intention of becoming a writer. Most people who study every aspect of animation become animators, or they become directors or board artists. They don't become writers, and that's the problem. Is I do believe we need more people who are like, I want to be a cartoon writer, and then they not only have to learn all of the disciplines involved in becoming a great writer, but they also have to learn about the process of animation. And like I said, there's not that many people who sort of set out to be cartoon writers.
Okay.
So Now, to answer your question, and this is going to be incredibly biased, so I'm just going to
No, that's
start
okay.
naming
No, we
people.
want we want bias. That's what this question's for, is bias for sure. I want to know
People,
who you like.
yeah, people that I've worked with. I mean, the first person that always comes to mind is Eric Trueheart, who
Okay.
was one of the head writers on Invader Zim, and he and I wound up creating shows together. Like if I've ever had anything close to a writing partner, it was Eric Trueheart. We created a few shows together. We pitched them. We got them, in development at various stages. None of them ever got picked up for a series, but he's someone I really like to work with, and I actually met him. He was he was either like a secretary or a production assistant or something at Klasky Chupo back when I started on Wild Thornberries, and I don't want to misquote him, but I believe he aspired to be a cartoon writer. Like that's what he was
He
setting out
wanted
to
to do
do.
cartoon writing. Yeah, only that. Yeah.
And then meanwhile, but like every animator should be, he's a classically trained writer. Like he's a Harvard educated, classically trained writer who just so happens to want to write for cartoons. And
Yeah.
consequently, he's really good at it. Also, really good at it, I gotta say, a really terrific cartoon writer is Steve Marmel, who was the head writer on The Fairly Odd Parents, and he
Okay.
was the co-producer and head writer when I was the supervising director on Yin Yang Yo at Disney. And what was great about that is he was one of the few writers who saw me as another writer.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the other problem is a lot of writers become producers and then they will, they'll only hire or they'll only consult with other people that they know as writers. And once you've got the stink of storyboards on you, you can't get it off. So
Yeah.
but Steve Marmel would always rally for me to help write stuff, and he was the first person in the industry on Yin Yang Yo who said, "Hey, John, write us a couple of scripts." And so those were some of my very first actual script writing credits. So Steve Marmel is great. Two of my other or three of my other like absolute top favorites are Sid Ventress, who also worked on Yin Yang Yo, Adria Walden, who worked on Yin Yang Yo, and has recently done a lot of stuff for like Barbie, Ada Twist Scientist, stuff that my daughter loves.
Oh, it's
And then
awesome.
another guy that more than anyone I feel like I really clicked with was for Hero 108 for Cartoon Network was Kent Redeker, who's also very well renowned in the industry. And these are all people who are great cartoon writers. And they've always stood out to me for that reason.
That's awesome. Yeah, none of I really don't have any to name for myself. I don't really know. Like you said, it's not writing is something and I'm going to make it a point to know more going forward. Being in an animation podcast, that'll be one of my personal homework projects is learning some more writers and
Well,
some
but
more
you
of their
did
work.
already mention if you go back and watch some of those early episodes of The Simpsons, very often some of the best episodes you'll see the name
Conan
Conan O'Brien.
O'Brien. Yeah,
So
the
you
ones
have
that Conan
recognized that.
O'Brien and Greg Daniels worked on were some of the best ones, and I think it was
Yeah.
because of the writing they did together at National Lampoon because they did the
Yep.
Lampoon or Harvard Lampoon, not
Yep.
National, but the Harvard
Yeah.
Lampoon together, and I think that's
Yeah.
where they were really able to stretch their legs. That was like their first,
Absolutely.
foray into stretching their legs after Saturday Night Live was
Yeah.
The Simpsons. So, yeah, no, I can't. Yeah, that's. I guess I can name those writers. Those are the ones I do know is Greg Daniels and Conan O'Brien for sure. And
Well, and it,
one thing I didn't know, it was actually a fact that I learned, which has nothing to do with writing really, but I didn't know that Klasky Chupo, the original 48 shorts on the Uma Thurman show for The Simpsons were animated by them, and I didn't know that. That was something that I
oh
just
yeah.
recently learned. I thought that
Yeah.
was awesome to know that some of my favorite kids cartoon shows also are responsible for the first 48
Yeah.
shorts plus I think the first 3 seasons too is what they did. I think they did the
Yeah.
first 3 seasons.
I think maybe either the first one or two seasons,
Yeah, something like
possibly
that.
just the first season.
It was pretty early. They did like the early one or so, or however
Yeah.
many it was. But the first 48 shorts for sure, and I really like
Yeah.
those shorts and how rough they
Oh,
are.
those were awesome.
I go back and revisit them quite often actually.
Yeah. What's funny is Klasky Csupo did the opening for The Simpsons, and they didn't change it until just a few years ago.
Oh, it stayed the
So
same for a really long time. Yeah, yeah.
for like the first 20 years, that opening was the original Klasky Csupo opening
Yeah, I
for
think
this.
all they did whenever TV went digital, I think whenever
Yeah,
they HD'd everything up, I think that was
yeah,
the only time that it changed. It didn't change. It was still the same sequence, animation sequence, but
right.
that was the only change that it ever had up until they just
Yeah.
recently. I haven't even seen the new one because I really, I'm a purist on some of these shows like Family Guy. I don't really watch past like season 4. I really don't
Yeah.
watch The Simpsons past probably like season 6. You know, I'm a purist on that. But King of the Hill, I'll watch all 13
Well,
seasons of.
here's the thing. I haven't watched The Simpsons probably since about season 7, and but here's what I will say. Um, Somewhere around season 8, 9, or 10, the shows got what I call really, really writery. That is to say, I can almost hear the writer saying, "Here's my joke. Here's my joke.
Yeah,
Here's
you
my
can
joke."
feel them. Yeah, you could feel the jokes.
And additionally, the Simpsons started no longer acting like a typical family. It seems like every other episode after season 7 or 8, like there was an episode where the Simpsons had a tennis court put in their backyard,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
suddenly
just
they're all playing tennis.
nonsensical stuff. Yeah, a nuclear family like that is not going to have a tennis
Yeah.
court in their
Well, the whole
backyard kind of
point
thing.
the
Yeah.
whole point of the Simpsons was always supposed to be that they're sort of lower middle class, not
Yeah.
even middle class. They were always kind of on the verge of financial ruin, and I always found that, really really engaging.
And
But
and that's what I really
but
liked about the 48 shorts. The first 48
yeah,
shorts, like you start to really not really like Homer, and he starts to look like a really bad dad in
yeah,
after a certain part
they were
in
a
the
family in
Simpsons.
crisis.
But in the first 48 the first 48, you really can't not like Homer.
Yeah,
He's flawed, but he's really dad like. He's more dad like, I
yeah.
feel like, in those 48 shorts than he is in the actual show.
Now I will also say this after I just got done, bashing on the last, 18 seasons of The Simpsons. I will say this. It's not I'm not into them. However, whenever I've turned it on, even though I'm like, oh wow, this is really writery, this is not my thing, I'm just not into this anymore. They're still better than a lot of other sitcoms that are on the
Oh yeah,
air right
there's a lot worse
now.
things you
Well,
could watch.
like I'll take 20 episodes of The Simpsons over one episode of The Big Bang Theory any day. And I know I'm going to upset a lot of people. Lots of people love The Big Bang Theory, but I can't stand it.
It's all right. It's not. I mean, there's worse things to watch than that too. I think.
But do you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah. No,
okay,
for sure. I
even
definitely know
The
what you mean.
Simpsons, The Simpsons is like pizza. Even when it's bad, it's still pretty good. Like it's still, it's not offensively terrible or anything. So,
No, and
um,
that's one thing too that I kind of like, another family primetime show that they're rebooting. So the original long running primetime adult animated comedy was Flintstones.
mhm.
They sold cigarettes and they sold
Yeah,
beer. They used all
yeah.
the old beer and cigarette ads. Uh, they're rebooting it, so there's they announced that it's going to be called Bedrock, and it's going to be with Warner Brothers. But so what do you think? What do you think about that? While we're on the writing, new shows discussion.
I'm just, you know what? I'm just tired of reboots. I got to
Tired
be
of reboots,
honest.
yeah.
Now that being said, I'm trying to get a Twitter campaign started where we're campaigning for NBC Universal to let me reboot Underdog. So,
Yeah,
by the way, uh, hashtag let John Fountain reboot Underdog on Twitter.
yeah. There you go.
Um,
Get it trending.
but I mean, I'm sure it's going to be great. I'm sure it's going to look great. I'm sure it's going to be funny because they're undoubtedly going to get top-notch talent to work on it. So
Elizabeth Banks.
I'm gonna try and
Is
judge it on its own
supposedly.
merits. But you know what? Here's a couple shows that I think got zero recognition as adult animated writer-driven shows.
Mhm,
Were F is for Family, and I know I seem biased because it's F, but F
absolutely.
is for Family is a really good adult animated sitcom.
Oh, Bill
BoJack
Burr. I love Bill
Horseman,
Burr. Yeah.
Bill Burr's great. BoJack Horseman, I think, was a really well done,
Will
really
Arnett, that's
sort
another
of
good one. Yeah, I like Will
high
Arnett's voice
concept,
acting.
and at least BoJack Horseman, a lot of times you look at some of these adult animated shows and go, well, why do they even bother animating it? These are just real people in real life situations. They don't do anything wacky or anything like that. BoJack Horseman, you could not do that in real life, so it's got a purpose for being animated.
I like it. Yeah, I
Um,
liked BoJack Horseman. I liked all the weirdness of it. I like the how they have the not even anthropomorphic, but even more so than that. They're like humanoid, like
yeah.
animal
Well, and
figurine things.
and again, now those are shows, those are intended for a grown-up audience, so you couldn't really, you couldn't just have those be dropping anvils and slipping on banana
No,
peels
you're
the
right.
whole way through. And now that being said, too, we were talking about kids programs being more. That's the other area where I will argue writers are a necessity, is because kids in their cartoons are getting and have gotten progressively over the years much more sophisticated in what they like.
Yeah.
You've got things like Amphibian, Owl House, and these and Gravity Falls and stuff like that. Stuff that, yes, these are cartoony cartoons and wacky stuff happens in them, but if you didn't have a writer, it just wouldn't work.
Oh, Adventure
It's
Time is a
not
great
gag driven.
example. I think for me, the two of them particularly that stand out to me that I watched was Adventure Time and the regular show. They have some
Yes.
really good writing in both of those shows, and I know they're targeted for kids. I know that they're made for kids, between the
Yeah.
ages of But to me, that felt targeted. I was 20 when those two shows came out, and that like you can't tell me that Rick and Morty wasn't two 20-year-old stoners playing video
Yeah.
games on their couch, because that's exactly what
Yeah.
what that felt Mordecai and Rigby on the regular show. That's exactly what that felt like to me. It felt like me and my buddies
Sure.
just sitting there playing video games at that era in our lives. That's what it felt like. There was like nothing kind of going on. We were just kind of there, and that's what the regular
Yeah.
show kind of felt like. One of the reasons I'm kind of excited for the Flintstones, and the only thing that really made me super excited for it, because again, I'm kind of with you on this reboot thing. Unless it's beneficial to me, like the King of the Hill thing, I'm not really interested in a lot of reboot stuff. But Stephen Root is doing Fred's voice, and Stephen Root is he's the guy who does he does some voices on King of the Hill as well, and he was on Office Space and all that stuff. So
Wow.
I really like him, and that's the only reason why I'm really kind of interested in that, just to see how he does Fred, because he's doing Fred's voice. So
Again, it'll be interesting, and it is sort of interesting how you're right. I mean, the Flintstones was sort of the original adult animated sitcom, and how it did, just in the course of my early life, it went from being an adult animated sitcom to being a kids show.
yeah, because
And
when
the
they
funny thing
rebooted
is,
it in the '80s, they turned them into
yeah,
kids. It was the Flintstone
when
Kids.
well,
Yeah.
what's funny about that is when The Simpsons first premiered, that was seen as the pinnacle of edgy and really
Yeah.
almost dangerous. Parents were
Super
scared
edgy.
to let their kids watch it because Bart was such a bad kid. And what's funny is now The Simpsons is completely and utterly mainstream. It's like,
Yeah, it's
they've
edgy
got rides
anymore.
at Disney.
Yeah, it's no. Well, not only do they have a ride at Disneyland, it just lost the edge, the original edge that it had. Society moved past that being edgy. There's different
Yeah.
things to be edgy with now than the comedy they were making, and that's
Yeah.
what I kind of like about Trey and Lance Parker with South Park is they
Trey and
have
Matt.
main Matt, Trey Lance and Matt Parker. Yeah, that's why I like their.
Trey Parker and Matt Stone.
Matt Stone, whatever their names are, I'm messing them up. Yeah,
I don't
Trey
know where
Parker,
Lance
Matt
is coming
Stone.
from, but
I don't
that's
know where
okay.
it's at. There's a football player named Trey Lance. I think that's where I keep mixing it up. But those two guys, the South Park guys.
Yeah.
There we go. I should have just said the South Park guys instead of trying to butcher their names. That's one thing I liked about them is they maintain their edge. That's one thing that's
Oh,
been
yeah.
good about their
Yeah,
show
and
is
they're-
that they whatever was edgy, they made sure they kept
Yeah.
the sharpness of that edge. They kept it all the way through their run so far, and I really hope that when they do go to end this show, whenever they choose to do so, that they get to end everything on their terms. I
Right.
hope that
Well,
they're
and
not just abruptly shut off and forced into half of a season of their show that they've already created, being forced into syndication like King of the Hill. But
right.
I don't know. I hope better for them when they get there, because all good things come to an end. There will be a
Well,
definite
and
end for it.
and that's the thing, and I've talked about this before. Trey Parker and Matt Stone, they sweat over those scripts. Like they burn gasoline on those scripts, and that's the thing. Like if I'm watching an episode of a show that's script driven, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I can tell that the writer just phoned this in. That's a big disappointment. Whereas, anytime I watch an episode of South Park, boy, story wise, it's got a beginning, middle, and end, and there's always something sort of very striking and poignant by the end. They never
Yeah.
ever stop, and that's the kind of dedication to no, every single episode is going to be powerful in some way or another. Some will be more powerful than others, but every single one has to have laughs in it. That's a real dedication that, again, forget about animated series. In any TV series, you can watch many shows and just sort of tell that they're phoning it in, and that's where I get really bored.
Yeah, no, definitely me too. You could feel when they're not, like you said, phoning it in, and so back to one of the shows that we've already discussed a bunch. I really like it because they keep on putting new episodes out and just keeps getting better and better every time. The Unicorn Eternal Warriors Eternal.
Oh yeah,
I think that is, man, it's turned out to be such a phenomenal show.
Yeah, no, see, that's a perfect example. Gendy Tartovsky, who's sort of a classic cartoon guy.
Mm-hmm.
Dexter's Lab and that sort of thing. Those were very storyboard. Two Stupid Dogs. Those were very storyboard driven shows. But here he is doing a show that absolutely needs a script to it, because there's
no
big,
way this story
complicated
can't be
arc.
told. Yeah, it's a very, very complicated story arc. And for those of you that think it's slow, and those of you that are struggling with the first episode or two because it is a little slow, just hold on to it, because it is. I don't think it was slow, honestly, but some people find it a little slow that I've seen, on the forums and things like that. But if you hang on for the episode 3, 4, and it's wonderful. Another show
I'm a big fan of the slow burn.
I like slow burns too. I do like slow burns, and I like that with my TV shows too that I watch. I like a show to kind of give you as many details as they can without giving you an entire story, for a season's worth of story in a few episodes. I like to get caught up, to know who's what, to know where's who, that kind of stuff, the who, what, where, when, why stuff. And then you could, ease into all the fun action and all that. You don't have to have your first episode with guns blazing every time. I feel like if you do that, then the expectation is for every episode's got to be better than this. Like, you can't have a first episode to be massive and explosive in that sense, because then, the second episode, it wasn't as explosive as the first, so now I'm disappointed. And the third one wasn't as explosive as the first, so now I'm disappointed. So I feel like the slow burn sets you in for success as an audience, as success for the audience. It sets them up for success in watching it.
Yeah, 100%. And that's another reason why, every show, regardless of what style it is, whether it's slapstick, whether it's plot driven, whether it's character driven, every animated show should have both a director and a head writer or head story person who are working with one another. Because that's the thing. Even if you're doing a slapstick show that's all just gags, you've got a whole series to produce. You can't have one episode where it's all about, dropping rotten apples on the characters' heads, and then immediately followed by an episode where it's all about dropping oranges on the characters' heads. It's like, you have to have someone who oversees all of them, regardless of whether or not you're a script driven or a story driven show. And the same goes for movies. If you're talking about feature films, no one wants to have, and nobody loves slapstick more than I do, but my goodness, an hour and a half, 2 hours of just gags would get really boring.
Yeah, it gets boring and old pretty quick. Yeah, definitely. Especially nowadays, I could watch Tom and Jerry 24/7 for the next 20 years and never and watch the same episode 1,000 times and never be not entertained. But in today's world of animation, you can't. That's why it's really hard to replicate Tom and Jerry with today's kids because it just doesn't. I don't think it works the same way. They still make it, of course. It's still a show that's being produced and things. And I think that's mostly a lot of the nostalgic feel for millennials. They produce a lot of these things, and it's just like all the remakes and stuff they've got going right now. I think a lot of that is just. Millennials are now not broke and at their mom's house. Yeah. So it's for these studios, it's another way to generate money because we have to be about one of the most merchandise buying generations there is. We have to be like merchandise over the last 50, 60 years of media merchandise in like the millennials have to have consumed more than any time frame. I feel like because all of anybody I know, like I've got friends that completely from head to toe most of the time they'll have a hat that's merched from somewhere. The shirt will be merched from somebody. Even the shorts will be merch from somebody, and then the socks, and then you've got shoes that are major shoe companies like Adidas who team up with Pokemon and make Pokemon themed shoes and just things like that. We've got to be the most media merchandise consumer generation.
What's funny is this really delighted me because I was waiting in line at my daughter's dance recital last weekend, and as I'm standing there, waiting for them to let us into the theater, there is what is probably a millennial and the millennial's child standing in line in front of me, and this little kid who I'm guessing is maybe 6 or 7 years old is standing there with his dad and grandma, and he's describing to his grandma in gruesome detail the Tom and Jerry cartoon that he had just got done watching and how great it was. And then when he was done with that, he was describing in gruesome detail the Coyote and Roadrunner cartoon that he had just got done watching. And I swear I wanted to butt in and be like, boy, your kid's got some good taste. Good for him.
Yeah.
Because the problem is, and this is probably one of those things that breeds resentment among the sort of classic cartoon crowd, is very few studios are willing to roll the dice on those gag-driven shows anymore because so much of it hinges on violence. And it hinges on violence, and it hinges on things that, it's like if you're a cartoon executive and you've got one show that's entirely gag driven, which means you're not even going to really get the jokes until the first pass of animation is done, or you've got a show that's much more script driven and that's a lot less, sort of violence driven.
Yeah, for sure.
You're going to go with the one that you can understand a little more. So I think it's very, very tough to sell those kinds of, gag-driven cartoons, which is why I think we're seeing and are going to continue to see a big emergence of just independent animation doing stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's what I'm kind of I'm really interested in, this new wave of independent animation too. Being attached to you now, I've been exposed to a lot more of it than I had before. I just scout your page, honestly, for people who post their things and share their things with you. And now that I have this animation conversation, social media, I've been able to modify my algorithm to only show me animation. And it is, I'll scroll through, and it'll be industry professionals I've never even heard of that are popping up randomly in the feed to follow and things like that. So I've been on that journey and just looking at some of this crazy stuff that's being made up. You posted one the other day or yesterday, I think it was, of the stop motion animation of Jenny.
Yeah, Jenny the teenage robot.
Jenny the teenage robot. That
Yeah,
was whoever you are out there, it would be great
yeah.
to interview you. Like I would
Yeah.
love to just talk to that person. That'd be crazy. I think that is that is one of the most interesting pieces of animation that I think I've seen so far in the month of May. That is just so
I,
unique.
I've seen stuff that again I've just started taking such a deep dive, and when I say started, I mean I started this, like 4 years ago, but just really diving into YouTube and discovering, yeah, there are people out there just making cartoons just for the fun of it, and they have no one to answer to.
Yeah.
So
And not only do they have nobody to answer to, some of the stuff that I've seen, it would have some of the industry people in the industry scrambling for jobs because they would definitely give some people a run for their money in some of the things they create.
yeah, yeah, and again, this anytime there's an argument that comes up about anything with regard to the animation industry, whether it's pro storyboard driven, pro script driven, pro this, pro that, pro anime, pro classic cartoon style, pro adult animation, it still just always boils down to good is good.
Good is good.
When something is done well, most people will go, "Oh wow, that's really good."
If there's a quote of the day for you, that is the one there. Good is good. That's true
Good
though.
is
That's
just,
that's very
yeah,
true about anything. It doesn't matter how independent it's created. If it's good, it's good. It doesn't matter if it costs
yeah,
$20 to make or
yep,
40 million to make. Good is good. It's why you get. It's why you have the Kevin Smiths of the world. He didn't. He used like maybe 30K or 40K or whatever
yeah,
it was to
yeah,
make the first Clerks, and it launched his entire life of getting to do what he wants for a living. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So
yep,
never sell yourself short, that's for sure, because there's an audience for everybody. And I think that's what's great about this independent animation stuff and this independent writing and things like
hmm,
that is with media, there's an audience for
hmm,
everybody now. There's an audience.
yeah,
If you just have to find what it is that you are good at, whether it's animation or anything, in this media world that we're in now, that we're trapped in.
hmm,
Anybody really, like I think anybody could be great. You just have to find your audience, and you have to find whatever niche it is that you're good at or whatever you know the most about, and stick with it. And there's so much money to go around in this world that everybody should be independently successful if they want to be with their animation. And I think this new wave is coming with this generation of kids coming up now, where
yeah,
these studios are really going to have to start like reevaluating how they conduct business with
yeah,
animators and writers. It's going to be to a point soon where the ball, I believe, will be in the animators' laps instead of the executives' laps, and the executives are going to be begging animators to not be independent, in essential, don't go run away from us to go make your own stuff that people will pay for. We'll pay you to stay
right.
here, kind of thing.
Well, and
So
that brings us to perhaps an excellent way to bring this full circle is, it should never have been about, I'm an artist, I'm a writer. It should have always been about we're storytellers.
mhm.
It should be about we're the creative voice, and that's what I think is going to, that's what needs to emerge in the industry, and that's what will, finally end all the feuds and
Mhm.
hopefully,
Kind of like
prevent future strikes. Is not it's not just writers, it's writers and artists, it's
yeah.
writers and
With
artists
our powers
and
combined, we are
actors, and yeah,
Cartoon
it's
Planet. Yeah.
right, it's creatives versus, the pencil pushers. And by the way, I'm the biggest, I understand the need for, the studios and the executives and the whole pipeline, but it's important that as creatives, we're all united in saying, hey, whether I'm an artist or writer, what I'm doing has value. There's
For
value
sure.
here. It's not because I think what happens is, because people in the upper tiers, because they can't understand it, they assume that it's easy, or they assume that it's and again, this goes back to, I've heard animators, bash on writers because, oh, what they do is so easy. It's like, really? Have you ever sat down and had to come up with a story when you have zero ideas.
Yeah,
And
no,
I've
it's
seen
not
those
easy.
same animators
It's
come up
not
with
easy.
show ideas that were terrible. So, again, it's about, it's not about we are artists, we are writers. It's about we are storytellers, and we are the creatives, and we're the ones who sort of hold the keys to this kingdom
Yeah.
that the entertainment industry so desperately relies on.
I actually had a series of stories I used to write. I could never draw, so I was never able to animate them. I always wished I could draw. I would do stick figures kind of thing, but it was a story of it was a bear, an adult bear, and a teenage bear, but they were kind of country rednecks, and they lived in the woods, but they lived in the woods and they acted like human survivalists. So they were in the woods and they were like, they're whittling fish hooks out of wood,
Mhm,
and they're
mhm.
building lean-tos and stuff like that. So that was something that stories I used to write that were kind of funny, I think.
Well, again, that's what's great about this sort of new wave of things that are coming. And again, um, the studios had better pony up and keep their creatives happy,
For sure, because they're
because
gonna be able to do it on their own and make
more
just as much
people.
money, if not more, than what they would make at a studio. There's people like
Yeah.
the amount of money that's out there right now. If I was a studio executive, I would be very, very worried in that sense that because once one show is independently successful,
Mhm.
off of YouTube or whatever it may be, once one show is able to be extremely independently successful without the need of Netflix or any of that other
Right.
stuff, then that modifies it. That changes the game. It's
Yeah.
just like in
No,
football.
absolutely.
It's like in football in the NFL when a new quarterback gets like $100 million more than the next guy down below him, and it resets the entire market for quarterback. It's the same thing. Like once somebody gets this independent money and it shows that they could independently put a complete show out on their own, I feel like it shifts the market in that direction
Yeah.
just a little bit more. It changes the marker or whatever for success for animators.
Oh, absolutely. There's a YouTuber that I won't mention his name because I don't know if he, but a very very successful comedic YouTuber who I saw him interviewed, and they're like, "Wow, your YouTube channel is so successful, and you're so funny. Why don't you audition for Saturday Night Live, or why don't you try to get into one of those, get a sitcom on a network or something like that?" And he was like, "Why would I do that? Why would I do that when I'm making a better living doing this here now with nobody to answer to?"
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Why would you shift when you could make the tens of millions of dollars on your own and you don't have
right.
to pay the studio a percent? The studio doesn't take a percentage of your IP. It's something you
Yeah.
created. Whether the studio owns it or not, it's a whole other story. It's yours at the end of the day. Your
Right.
brain created it. The legality or whatever,
Yeah.
that's just,
Yeah.
that's just pencils and paper at the end of the day to a creative. At the end of the day, you created it, so in your mind,
Yeah.
it's yours. It belongs to
And
you no matter what, So
and
that's a
again,
tough thing to do, to
this
sell yourself like that.
this progression is, I believe, going to be good for everybody, because the independent creators are going to enjoy the fact that independent creations are getting more attention and more money, and it's easier to make a living off of being an independent creator, and consequently the studios are going to have to start ponying up and have to start treating their creative talent better. Otherwise, they are all going to go independent.
Absolutely,
Um,
and so they should. I mean, if you're not
yeah,
being treated, it's just like any job anywhere you're at. If you're not being treated what you believe is to be fair, and really it boils down not even to what's fair for the market, but what's fair for you, what's fair for your own principles
right,
as a human being, what do you believe you deserve. Uh,
right.
and
And that's the thing.
if
Like,
you
if I got,
accept the status
I
quo, that's on
consider.
you. But a lot of people don't. I don't think people should accept the status quo for
Oh,
their creative stuff. It's priceless at the end of the day. The art you create, there's
yeah,
not really a dollar amount that could be put on it when you create it. Yeah, of
yeah,
course, people attach monetary amounts to people's art and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, when an executive comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to buy
yeah,
this. I want to sell your
yeah.
show. I want to do this," it's. I mean, it's a catch-22. Yeah, you get to make money, but are you making what the actual? Think about Dexter's Lab. That's just one that
Right.
comes to my mind because it's a favorite of mine. I imagine that the amount of love and the amount of like cultural impact that show had wasn't near the amount that
Yeah.
Gendy was compensated for that. He wasn't compensated near the amount, I don't believe, for what its impact is, because that's a hugely impactful show on my childhood, because I was that nerdy kid, and you're showing me that, oh, there's a nerdy kid in a TV show now, and he's kind of cool. You know, he kind of does all this cool stuff. You know, so it kind of flips the table. You know, on stuff like that.
It does, because I got to tell you, I'm basically an independent animator at the moment, and if Disney came knocking at my door and said, "Hey, we've seen this thing you're doing. We want to buy it up, and we want to put it on our network," I'd talk to them. But and by the way, I'd probably move heaven and earth to work with them. But I'm in a much better bargaining position than I was 10, 15 years ago.
Absolutely.
Because if I can say to them, I'm like, look, yeah, I'll sell you my show, but here are my demands. Here's what I want, and here's everything you have to give me if you want to take it, because they have to make it worth my while at this point. And that's true of writers, and that's true of everybody in the pipeline at this point. So, fingers crossed. I'm hoping. I'm kind of an optimist at heart, and I'm really hoping that we're sort of entering into a golden age where
we are. I feel it.
Independent and mainstream media outlets benefit, or at least the creatives in these outlets benefit from all this. But
based on a lot of the new stuff that I've been seeing be created mainstream, not just in the independent side of things, a lot of the things that I've been seeing that are being created mainstream, I really think that we're shifting into this new age of not only just animation for kids, but it's just a whole new range of just animation for everybody. Another one that I've seen here recently, and I'm going to wrap it up after this one, Agent Elvis. I think that one is just, I don't know, I think the writing is really good. I really like the animation. It's really action-packed. I kind of like it a lot. So is there anything that you wanted to plug about what you've got going on, or are you just still keeping it hush hush, or are we gonna say
I'm still keeping things a little bit hush hush? Okay. But suffice it to say, if you want in on the big secret that I've been hinting about for quite a while now, the very first thing you should do is go on YouTube and go to @FountainsPenCartoons. And on that channel, I go into a little bit of detail of what I've been working on lately and what's going to be, coming up in the very near future. And, also, if you just follow me on Twitter, I'm very accessible on Twitter, @FountainCartoon on Twitter. If you follow me on either of those things, you can find out what's going on, because I've got some pretty exciting stuff coming up.
Yep, there you go. And you could also go get our social media stuff at Animation Convo for our Twitter and our Instagram. And our email is theanimationconvo@gmail.com. Our YouTube is @animationconvo. So you can go check us out everywhere there. I think that's it. I don't think I have anything else to add.
By the way, I will reveal this.
Okay, here we go.
Fountain's Pen Productions is animating little segments from this podcast that will be put up on the Animation Conversation YouTube channel. So,
and remind me to get you the login for that for your animators so they can upload that stuff. Unless you're just going to send it to me, it doesn't matter. I could just get. I've
started seeing little bits of it, and it is going to be great. So everyone, please keep tuning in, like, share, and subscribe. And beyond liking, sharing, and subscribing, for goodness sakes, nothing beats word of mouth. Talk to your friends about us, talk to your family about us. Just spread the word that we're around.
Yeah, we have had so many weird of mouth. We've had so many I did it again. We have so many weird word of mouth circumstances that happen with our King of the Hill stuff. Word of mouth is crucial. So like everybody everywhere, tell your mom, your dad, your dog, your cat. If you got a parrot that talks too much, just whisper Animation Conversation into its ear a bunch so it repeats it when you have guests. Like whatever you have to, you got a talking snake, teach it Animation Conversation. Like whatever you got to do, spread it for us. We appreciate y'all so much sticking with us through these episodes, and we can't wait to bring y'all more like crazy good stuff and some more animation insides. I'm your host, Rusty, and
it's your old buddy F. Zigga zigga ah, party people.
All right. Appreciate you guys watching.
And that brings us to the end of another incredible episode of Animation Conversation. We hope you enjoyed this animated adventure as much as we did. Remember, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, we would love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out to us on our social media channels or through good old-fashioned email. We value your input and want to make Animation Conversation a podcast that resonates with animation lovers like you. Our Instagram and Twitter are @AnimationConvo. Our YouTube is @AnimationConversation. Our email is theanimationconvo@gmail.com. Before we say our final goodbyes, we want to remind you to stay animated. Keep exploring, appreciating, and sharing the magic of animation with others. Let your imagination soar and let the world of animated wonders continue to inspire and captivate you. Thank you once again for joining us on this incredible journey. Until next time, this is Wubcake, signing off for Animation Conversation. Keep watching, keep dreaming, and keep the animation conversation alive.